Also, we're in the home stretch right now at the Synod, and still a lot of controversial comments coming out in headlines. One of them coming from Cardinal Gracias of Mumbai, who is on the writing committee, I believe, for the final report that's going to come out. And he's saying that very little attention has been paid to homosexuality, and he thinks maybe it should have been discussed a little bit more at the Synod. Are you hearing that from other people there?
Well, I am hearing that it hasn't actually been discussed very much, and I think that surprised a lot of people, given that it did appear in the working document. What I'm hearing on that is simply that it just hasn't really been much discussed, except in relation to language. There's a general consensus, I would say, and I think this is very likely to be in the final document, that the Church needs to find a new language for expressions like intrinsically disordered to describe the homosexual inclination. Interestingly, even Archbishop Charles Chaput of Philadelphia, who's not normally considered a great sort of progressive on these issues, has joined actually that call for a new language. So I think that's going to be a very, very definite result of the Synod. But what hasn't been discussed is the whole issue of gay marriage and gay unions. I really think that hasn't appeared in the Synod much at all.
So I mean that's pretty much an issue that's off the table, would you say?
Well, let's see what's going to be in the document, but my sense is they haven't discussed it much, which means that what's likely to be in the document is what was in the working document, which is, that gay people need to be welcomed and embraced. And I mean, Cardinal Gracias's interview that he gave on this, I mean, it's really quite remarkable because he has stood out among other Asian bishops and Indian bishops in making a real point of reaching out to gay people and giving them the message, that they're welcome. And in that sense, he's been he's been on the vanguard of that issue in South Asia. Although I have to say, what he says would not be surprising from most American or European bishops.
Right. Bishop Peter Doyle from England, he said that he feels that gays and lesbians are being left in limbo, and he says that there's enough material that you could devote an entire synod to just the issue of gay Catholics.
Right, exactly, and I think this is the big point: is that the Synod is really far too small a mechanism to deal with very, very weighty issues. And I mean, this has been a consistent observation that this is a pastoral synod, which is all about devising new pastoral strategies to bolster marriage and family and to respond to the different circumstances of our time, namely, above all, the collapse of the support in law and culture for the traditional Christian understanding of marriage. Frankly, it's not a synod that can deal with doctrinal issues, with teaching issues as such, and that's been a very strong message that we've been getting recently. Don't expect this synod to solve all these big problems. That requires another kind of a forum.
Cardinal Pell this week reacted to the Holy Father's weekend words about decentralizing the approach of the Church, that the Church might react one way in the United States to an issue, another way in Africa. And Cardinal Pell says that you can't do that. And some other bishops have said you can't fracture, you can't have people in one situation treated differently in one country and then allowed to do something in another country.
And I would say this is one of the dividing lines in the Synod, is one between, I would say, those who say that in order for the Church to give a proper pastoral response to some of those challenges, then a greater degree of decentralization is necessary. After all, it's the local church that knows best how to respond to local problems, and others who are worried that that would signify a weakening of the magisterium. In other words, the idea that we have a common teaching. Now, there isn't really a contradiction between those two positions, because I think everybody would agree that in what pertains to doctrine and teaching, the Church has to be unified. There is only, as it were, one magisterium and one teaching. But when it comes to the pastoral application of that teaching, there's no reason why there should not be greater latitude. And in a way, the conflict is between those who sort of say, well, actually, this is doctrine, and the others will say, no, actually, that's pastoral application. But let me just give you two examples that have really struck me in the last couple of days of what one might call locally relevant issues. Cardinal Napier, that's the Archbishop of Durban in South Africa, who's also on the writing committee and a pretty robustly conservative conservative voice in the synod, was just telling journalists earlier at the briefing that in Africa, cohabitation is often a step towards marriage. The two families get together, they negotiate a dowry. The guy then goes off to earn the dowry in the city and can often take years to do that. And in the meantime, the families agree that they should be allowed to live together as a step towards marriage. And he was saying, this is not against marriage, this is a step towards marriage. How can we incorporate that, as it were, into the church's sacramental understanding? Well, that's a very Africa-specific issue. Now, let me give you another one. We heard from Patriarch Tual, Archbishop, Patriarch of Jerusalem, that he says in the Middle East there's no such thing as civil marriage. So the whole issue of kind of the civilly remarried just simply doesn't arise. So, I mean, there clearly has to be a degree of latitude, of flexibility at a local level. And I think, that's something the Pope wants to see more of, is local churches having robust local responses to local specific situations.
Okay, well, there's a lot more to do, only a couple of more days to do it, and we'll check in again with you on Thursday, and we're going to ask you some questions about what we could expect from this synod. So we'll talk to you on Thursday. Thanks so much, Austen.
I look forward to that, Ed. Bye. Yeah.